This is Brian Mullin. Several years ago he came up with an idea that now possibly is being used to bait the biggest YouTube scam we've ever seen. I want to be clear right now at the start of this video that I do not believe that Brian has done anything wrong at all. I believe that Brian was an engineer and a flat earther to boot, and he came up with this experiment idea a few years back. The idea is to try and finally prove the shape of the earth, flat or spherical. I want to also make clear that this video is not about flat earth versus globe earth, but a potential con that is happening right now. So to understand this, it is important to understand what Brian's experiment is, and I think the best way to know that is to let him briefly talk about it. Go ahead, Brian.
So this is force the line. Here's my idea. What we do is we need 2 miles of relatively flat land. We set posts over a 2-mile stretch of land. What I've got here are my posts, okay? 10 feet on center. And then between the very first 2 posts, we construct a beam between the 2 and level that beam. And then we do the same thing all the way to the end. We level each one of these beams all the way for 2 miles. So over 2 miles, those beams will actually follow the curve. They have to. This very first beam we construct right here is perfectly parallel, or as close as we can get to perfectly parallel to this beam. It's leveled too. We level that beam, okay? But then for all of the rest of the beams on the forced line, as I'm calling it, we use a connection here. It forces this beam, it forces a right angle connection to the first beam, okay? So, say this is our first beam that's leveled, okay? It's leveled out. The next beam that comes in, we use precision machine work, or like a CNC machine, or something similar, to create a connection that forces a right angle connection. Now, if the Earth is a sphere with a circumference of 25,000 miles, then over 2 miles, we should see from this point to this point a drop of roughly 32 inches. You can draw this in AutoCAD and prove it, okay? So, we go all the way down to the end. And this last post, we should have 32 inches between these 2 lines, okay? Because over here we started at 64 to give ourselves ample space. And at the end, there should be 32 inches.
What an absolutely beautifully simple idea and mathematically sound. So over a 2-mile stretch, you've got a row of posts around 10 foot apart, and across the top of them you have post rails, each of which is levelled. And so, if the earth is curved, they will naturally follow the curve. If the earth is straight, they will remain straight. Below that you fasten a second rail, also starts off level and parallel to the top rail. However, you continue that line forced to remain straight. So if the earth is flat, the 2 rails will remain parallel. If the earth is curved, the forced line should appear to approach the top rail. Excellent. The catch. The catch is, it's not going to work. So we've got a 2-mile length, which is 3,218 metres. Each beam is about 10 foot long, 3.04 metres, giving you 1,058 beams. Now if each of those beams was 1 millimetre out over its length, that gives you a total potential error of 105.8 centimetres. That's 41.8 inches. You were looking for 32. Your error bar, in this case, is greater than the expected result. So immediately you could see you couldn't use a material such as wood because it's going to expand and contract, warp and twist just with the weather. You're going to have to use steel or something. The other problem is you need to get each connection absolutely perfect. What you cannot have is any bend at all. Any misalignment in those joints, again, screws up the whole result. George Natiuk did some calculations on this a couple years ago.
Just like we had here, G is angle theta swept out by the arm here, which it happens to be the thickness of these rail members. Just substituting in theta, we get G is equal to L over radius of the earth times the thickness of the rail member. L is 0.1 meters. That's 10 centimeters. Our that's our tall. I'm sorry. That's our tall. Our L is 4.88 meters, and we divide by 6,371 times 10 to the third meters. Well, that works out to G comes out in meters. This is in meters. So our G works out to 76.6 nanometers. Okay, that's 10 to the minus 9th meters. That's less than the wavelength of light, green light.
That's less than the wavelength of light, green light.
The wavelength of green light that we see is 532 nanometers. So this is less than a wavelength of green light by a factor of 7. Or we could put this in terms of angstroms. This is 766 angstroms. An angstrom is 10 to the minus 10th meters. This is basically the diameter of one atom. So we're talking that the tolerance on the gap here has to be better than 766 atoms across.
Thanks, George. So basically, we're talking over 1,000 connections, each of which has to be more accurate or to within a tolerance of 76 atoms.
The ultimate experiment to practically prove the shape of the Earth would be a fixed, permanent, tangible construction demonstrating empirically, in perpetuity, the truth for all to test. Professional structural engineer and outspoken globe skeptic Brian Mullen has invented and outlined just such a structure in his Force the Line project.
Brian Mullen started pushing and organizing the Force the Line test, which was a similar water-based test to prove the lack of curvature.
So, I'm going to post the link. McFlatface has put one up. It's called Force the Line. It's very similar to what I'm proposing, and it would work just the same. Again, we're just dealing with square reference.
Force the Line is an idea for a 2-mile-long construction project that would give us measurable proof as to whether we live on a spherical or level Earth. The idea was originally put forward a few years ago by engineer Brian Mullen in a series of videos on his YouTube channel called Balls Out Physics.
And the reason he's saying this, he's making excuses because he doesn't want to get involved in Force the Line, which is a mechanical measurement proving scientifically the globe is nonsense.
So what better way to interest your marks than a little bit of conspiracy.
This is when he was personally attacked and threatened with his career.
However, not long after putting forward this idea, his YouTube channel was closed down. It's understood he was given an ultimatum to stop investigating Flat Earth publicly, otherwise it would jeopardize his career.
So we have the proposal, an experiment that couldn't possibly work. We got a whole bunch of people pushing the idea. And we've got a little bit of conspiracy in there, just to spice things up. Now, we need the money. Step in, GoFundMe. And here we are, Force the Line. It's using the old Brian Mullin's video to describe the experiment. They're asking for £100,000. You heard me right, £100,000. And in fact, in just a few days, they've already raised 3,860. There's a bit of a backstory. Humans have been debating for centuries whether our world is spherical or flat and level. YouTube has recently rekindled the debate, yada yada yada. I propose we force the line. Oh look, a little bit more conspiracy. An engineer named Brian Mullin proposed this idea 5 years ago. He mysteriously disappeared shortly afterwards and hasn't been heard of since. Now they're looking for 100,000, already raised 3,860. Let's just have a look at some of those donations. Lots of donations, some of them as high as £100, 50, 100. And I saw that the largest one to date is £500. This isn't pin money. This is money that could really affect people. And if this wasn't enough, not only have we got Force the Line, organised by this chap, Chris Watson, more in a while, we've also got copycats. Force the Line in conjunction with Chris Watson. Attention, this is an unverified copy of Chris Watson's Force the Line. $50,000. So we've got other people asking for money who aren't even directly involved in this experiment. Now this Force the Line experiment is being run by Chris Watson, also known as Flatty McFlatface. Now I hadn't heard of him before, but he has apparently been around for a couple of years. Now recently, Phuket Word did an interview with him all about the Force the Line experiment, and they were talking about how it would all work. Now I will give credit to Nick, because he did ask a couple of very interesting questions.
Okay, brilliant. I mean, yeah, obviously you've set the target at 100,000. What's that based on, really?
Well, it was probably to motivate more because I thought about putting 500,000 down.
You heard that right. He was thinking of asking for £500,000. And this figure of 100,000, it hasn't been calculated from costs of materials and construction engineers and so on. It's just a figure he's picked to motivate people, as £500,000 probably would be too much.
So how, I mean, you've got to be asked, playing devil's advocate really, how is, what assurances are there that this money will go directly to that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I still believe that a handshake is a contract.
Right.
And I still believe that your word is your bond.
I'm kind of old-fashioned. I still believe that a handshake is a contract.
Right.
And I still believe that your word is your bond.
Yeah.
And without it, what are we? So that's all I can really say. The whole process will be documented. Dell wants it to be completely public.
Yeah.
There's everything will be put in front of everybody.
Right.
I'll update people with screenshots, and people can see the GoFundMe anyway. They can see how much is in there.
Right.
And I'd even be prepared to, if everything gets worked out with the GoFundMe, and if they do start transferring the money to my account, I'll just take snapshots of my account to show that the money's in there and building up. So as the GoFundMe balance kind of does that, my account would do that.
That's right.
But I've got a couple of savings accounts that I can put the money in. I'll get a little bit of interest on them.
So what do you think? Is this a scam? Some kind of con? I don't know. But we're talking about a GoFundMe for £100,000, the monies from which will get transferred into some guy's account. But you can trust him because his word is his bond. Now I know that a whole load of flat earthers are going to say that I'm just saying all this just to get the experiment shut down, to hide the truth. But hey, if it was possible and you guys were going to pay for it, I would be happy, because I know that it would show the curve of the earth. No, the reason I'm doing this video is nothing to do with whether the earth is flat or round. It's to do with trying to protect people. There already are numerous people who have donated £100 and at least one has donated 500, all for an experiment that couldn't possibly work, whatever the outcome. So if you are a flat earther, or indeed anyone who's considering contributing to this particular project, I suggest you don't. Stay a flat earther, but keep your money. Finally, let's just assume for the moment that Flatty McFlatface is 100% honest, wants to do this experiment and will try and do this experiment. Then you owe it to everybody who may donate to make sure that this experiment is something that could even work before you spend a whole lot of other people's money. If you're new to the channel, please hit that like and consider subscribing. Until next time, stay sensible. I want to give massive thanks to all of my supporting members and patrons. Thank you all so very much.
Shut up and sit down.